a question about history, but I got a few more things on this
Okay.
NGO front. Talk to us about, first of all, people heard about NGOs is like, okay, what's an NGO and what's a GC corporation? And, some of the entity legalese, goes over people's head. Can you walk us through some of that?
Yeah, well, I think it's important to really understand what's being talked about with NGOs. And I think you need a little bit of historical context of the term. Here in the United States, we're very familiar with the idea of a nonprofit organization. And it makes a lot of sense when a church says they're a nonprofit organization, right? And we've been doing that for I don't know, ever since we've had income tax probably in this country. So you've got that situation, right? And then what happens is the UN comes along and it wants to recognize nonprofits as well. And they develop a new nomenclature for nonprofits and they call them NGOs. And then if you actually look to see what's going on around the world, the best I can tell is that if you're in any other Western country besides the United States, they don't use the terminology nonprofit. They use the terminology NGO. And so there's nothing particularly evil about an NGO. I mean, it's just that's what we call nonprofits in other places, right?
Yeah.
Where it becomes more of an issue, and there was a reason why the UN did change the nomenclature instead of calling it a nonprofit, was because they wanted to exclude spiritual organizations from this. So a church wouldn't fall under the category of NGO. And that's my understanding. And if you read about the terminology and where it came from, they kind of redefined it, but they redefined it a little bit differently than the way we define nonprofits. And then I was just shocked when I found out in 1985 our church became an NGO. And the reality is that, okay, when I say became an NGO, we were always an NGO in a sense because we were a nonprofit, right? And then this is where it becomes really important is to the recognition that your NGO has. And so it's not that we became an NGO in 1985, but what we did is we received UN recognition of being an NGO. And then you got to meet UN standards. And it's a little bit odd to me for a church because I feel like they were trying to define churches out of it. So all of this raises questions. And I just kind of wanted to talk about it for two ways. One is I don't think we should uniformly take the attitude that NGOs are bad, but we should ask a lot of questions as to what kind of an NGO is recognized by the UN.
Yeah. You're making a distinction between nonprofits or NGOs in general and UN NGOs, that which the UN has authorized, and it's got some sort of stake in it. It's got some sort of interest in it. Is it trying to co-opt with its ideology, the worldview of these NGOs? Because I know that to a great extent, when it comes to the religious ones, they will very much emphatically favor religious NGOs that are doing humanitarian work without proselytizing, right? So is it an attempt to marginalize fundamental Bible-believing religions, but utilize their humanitarian impulse for globalist sorts of agendas?
Yeah, I think that that's true. And one of the things that I've said is that what's happened, like ADRA, of course, became an NGO that's recognized as well, and it receives this money and it can't proselytize. There's a problem because what you're doing is you're separating the impulse to do mission work from the impulse to do evangelism. Mm-hmm. And if you have a young kid, like one of my best friend's son wants to be a missionary pilot, right? And I want him to be a missionary pilot. That's great. You encourage the kid to do that. But then if you then make him a missionary pilot for, say, ADRA, then you tell him to suppress the spiritual side. Huh. And that's terrible. What you should have is you should have missionaries that are saying, hey, yeah, come out and help us. We could use a missionary pilot and we're going to be spreading the gospel this weekend. You know, we need these impulses should go together. The impulse to help people and the impulse to share the gospel. And instead, I think that they're being pulled apart. And I think in the process of doing that, you're crippling the next generation of missionaries terribly.
Mm-hmm. Well, if listeners take nothing else away from this broadcast, remember our mission. Our mission is what Jesus said. He came to seek and save the lost. And it's our job to carry that on, to follow the Great Commission, and to care for the needy, to uplift the oppressed, and including those who are being persecuted for their religious liberty on vaccines or any other issue. And to combine these two,
Yeah.
Christian
Well,
help ministry.
there's a great quote that most of the these Bible schools like AFCO and Mission College and stuff, and I wish I had it memorized, but I can
Christ's
certainly
method
paraphrase
alone.
it. It's this one where he mingled with the people and he showed
Yeah.
that he cared for their good, and took care of them, and then he bid them follow me.
Yes.
We can't do the and then they bid him part.
Yeah.
And so it's like,
what do you
a
mean
real
we
problem.
can't? In what context? Explain that a little
Well,
bit.
in the ADRA context would be an example. Anytime that we're receiving government funds. And that kind of brings me to another observation, and that is there was a recent article I saw. I don't know anything more than what the article had, which wasn't a whole lot of information, but basically ADRA Australia was advocating to the Australian government to be sure that it was either to the government or to the people to vote in favor of this. I can't remember which, but basically they wanted to be sure that they would still receive government funding from the Australian government. And so I think that this typifies a problem that we need to be thinking about, and that is we've heard a lot about how ADRA has lost USAID funding, but it's not just USAID. There's other ADRA organizations around the world that get funding from different places. And uniformly, the Western governments, when they make these funds available, they're going to be just like the U.S. government, and they're going to say, no proselytizing.
Mm-hmm.
I can't tell you exactly what Australian law is because it's never been my issue, but I can tell you that's pretty much the norm. And when you go around to these other governments, it would be amazing to me if it was any different, because as you see the other Western democracies that are doing this kind of stuff, they're all more secular than we are. So I'm pretty sure there's a no proselytizing requirement for that money.